In the fall of 1944, the Allied armies stood at the gates of victory. Germany was reeling. Its armies were exhausted, its cities burning, its defeat only weeks away. And yet, in the middle of this moment, something extraordinary happened. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower made a decision that shocked the Allied command. He quietly removed nearly 300,000 American soldiers from Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's control. No public announcement, no dramatic confrontation, just a sudden shift of power that would change the course of the war in Western Europe. Montgomery believed he had earned those men. He believed victory depended on him. Eisenhower believed otherwise. This was not a battle against Germany. This was a battle inside the Allied command, driven by ego, politics, and a growing fear that Montgomery's ambition was becoming more dangerous than the enemy itself. In the fall of 1944, the Allied armies were pushing deep into Germany, following the triumphs of Normandy and the liberation of Paris. The Wehrmacht was reeling, exhausted from months of relentless assaults, and the end of the Third Reich seemed inevitable. Yet, amidst the chaos of the battlefield, a different kind of crisis was brewing, not one of bullets, bombs, or blitzkrieg, but of command, ego, and politics. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had a monumental responsibility. Not only did he oversee the largest coalition in modern military history, but he also had to balance the delicate egos and ambitions of the generals under his command. Among them, one man stood out: Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the British commander whose victories in North Africa and Normandy had earned him fame, respect, and a reputation for arrogance. Montgomery's brilliance on the battlefield was matched only by his confidence in his own infallibility, a trait that was about to collide with the American approach to war. The crisis began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the months following the liberation of Paris. While the Allied armies had advanced at breathtaking speed across France, tensions within the command were growing. Montgomery, aware of his British successes and frustrated by what he saw as sluggish American operations, began to assert his authority over American forces. It started with subtle suggestions, then direct commands, and eventually public declarations that implied British leadership had rescued the Americans in moments of crisis. To the American generals, this was more than irritating. It was a direct challenge to their honor and authority. Eisenhower, ever the careful diplomat, observed these developments with growing concern. He understood that the war in Europe was not only a military struggle but a political one. The alliance was fragile, a patchwork of nations united by necessity rather than affection. If Montgomery were allowed to continue claiming American victories as his own, the trust between the Allied commanders could fracture irreparably. Worse, Eisenhower feared that Montgomery's ego and ambition might start dictating strategy, putting the lives of hundreds of thousands of American soldiers at risk for the sake of personal glory. The tipping point came in early January 1945. Montgomery, emboldened by his previous successes, demanded permanent command over not one, but two American armies, the 1st and the 9th. This was a staggering request. Over 500,000 men, trained, disciplined, and already engaged in combat operations, were to be subordinated under a British commander for an extended campaign. Such a move would have given Montgomery unprecedented influence over the war effort, effectively sidelining Eisenhower's American generals, including Omar Bradley, Courtney Hodges, and William Simpson. The consequences of granting this demand were unthinkable. It would not only undermine American authority, but could destabilize the entire Allied coalition. Eisenhower did not act rashly. He convened private meetings with his closest advisors, analyzing every possible outcome. He considered the political ramifications in Washington and London, the operational risks on the battlefield, and the morale of the troops themselves. He recognized that the American soldiers had fought valiantly in Normandy, the Falaise Pocket, and the push across France. To allow them to be redirected under British command for purely political reasons would be a betrayal of their sacrifice. Meanwhile, Montgomery continued his campaign of subtle manipulation. He held press conferences emphasizing the British role in the success of the Allies and hinting that American forces had needed his guidance to avoid disaster. To the American public, this sounded like modesty. To the generals in the field, it was an insult. Omar Bradley, who had commanded the First Army since D-Day, confronted Eisenhower privately, warning him that Montgomery's actions could provoke a mutiny among American officers if left unchecked. Faced with this dilemma, Eisenhower made a bold, unprecedented decision. Without fanfare, without a public declaration, he quietly removed nearly 300,000 American soldiers from Montgomery's control. The First Army, under General Hodges, and the Ninth Army, under General Simpson, were returned to direct American command. Montgomery retained a temporary command for a specific Operation Plunder, the planned crossing of the Rhine, but with explicit limitations. The command was temporary, mission-specific, and would revert to the Americans once the operation was completed. This decision was not just administrative, it was strategic and psychological. Eisenhower knew that allowing Montgomery to consolidate permanent command over American forces would have emboldened the Field Marshal, potentially compromising future operations. By carefully crafting a compromise granting Montgomery limited authority for a specific mission while preserving American control over the bulk of their forces, Eisenhower maintained the delicate balance between British pride and American authority. He avoided a public confrontation, preventing a potential crisis in the press, and ensured that coalition unity remained intact. The impact of this decision reverberated immediately. Montgomery, accustomed to unchallenged authority, was furious. To him, the temporary nature of his command was an insult to his achievements. Yet he had little choice but to comply. Behind the scenes, Eisenhower's aides meticulously monitored Montgomery's actions, ensuring that the American armies remained fully operational and ready to resume independent operations once the Rhine crossing was complete. This required constant communication, detailed oversight, and an unwavering resolve to maintain the integrity of the Allied command structure. For the American generals, Eisenhower's decision was a vindication. Bradley and Simpson, in particular, felt reassured that their authority had not been undermined. The troops, too, benefited from the clarity of command. Morale improved as soldiers understood that their leaders were trusted and that their sacrifices were not being co-opted for political gain. Eisenhower's deft handling of the situation demonstrated the importance of leadership not just on the battlefield, but within the complex network of Allied politics and personalities. Yet the episode also highlighted a broader truth about coalition warfare. Success requires more than strategy and firepower. It demands diplomacy, psychological insight, and the ability to navigate conflicting egos without jeopardizing operational objectives. Eisenhower's ability to act decisively, yet subtly, ensured that the Allies could maintain cohesion while still executing one of the most ambitious operations of the war, the crossing of the Rhine, a pivotal moment that would open the path to the heart of Germany. In the months that followed, the repercussions of Eisenhower's decision became clear. The American armies, under their own commanders, moved swiftly and efficiently through the German defenses. Patton's Third Army, exemplifying the American doctrine of rapid, mobile warfare, exploited every weakness in the enemy lines. Montgomery, limited to his temporary command, participated in Operation Plunder but found his influence constrained. The lesson was unmistakable. While tactical brilliance is vital, strategic authority and clear command structures determined the ultimate outcome of war. The story of Eisenhower's quiet yet decisive intervention is a testament to the complexities of leadership in coalition warfare. It was not a battle fought with tanks, artillery, or infantry. It was a battle fought with strategy, psychology, and political foresight. By removing 300,000 American soldiers from Montgomery's command, Eisenhower preserved not only the operational effectiveness of the Allied armies, but also the fragile trust that held the coalition together. In doing so, he ensured that the final push into Germany would be executed with precision, coordination, and a respect for the sacrifices of the men who fought and died on the front lines. By early 1945, the war in Western Europe had entered its final phase. German resistance was crumbling, but the challenge for the Allies was no longer just about defeating enemy forces. It was about maintaining momentum, coordinating massive armies, and managing the complex interplay of personalities within the coalition command. In this delicate environment, Operation Plunder, the planned crossing of the Rhine River, became both a military and political crucible. It was a test not only of Allied military might, but of Eisenhower's authority and Montgomery's ambitions. For Montgomery, the Rhine crossing represented an opportunity to cement his legacy. He saw it as the pinnacle of his strategic vision, a chance to lead a decisive operation that would overshadow any American accomplishments. He meticulously planned, emphasizing caution, thorough preparation, and overwhelming firepower. Every artillery battery, every engineering detail, every infantry maneuver was analyzed and rehearsed. To Montgomery, success depended on meticulous planning and absolute control over the forces under his command. The more control he had, the more assured he was that victory would be attributed to his genius. Yet Eisenhower's temporary arrangement meant that Montgomery did not have full command over the American armies. The 1st and 9th Armies, the backbone of the U.S. contribution, remained under American Generals Hodges and Simpson, with operational directives that ensured they would only collaborate under specific, tightly defined parameters. This limitation frustrated Montgomery, who was accustomed to unilateral authority. He had been forced to accept a compromise, a subtle humiliation, but one that would ultimately ensure coalition cohesion and operational flexibility. Meanwhile, the American generals were preparing their forces for the crossing in their own style. General Hodges and General Simpson favored mobility, rapid exploitation, and flexible responses to evolving conditions. Their planning emphasized speed and initiative, reflecting the American doctrine that had proven so effective since Normandy. The Rhine, a formidable natural obstacle, required both engineering expertise and aggressive tactical maneuvering. Bridges had to be constructed under fire, riverbanks secured, and enemy fortifications neutralized, all while maintaining coordination with British and Canadian forces. As March 1945 approached, the stage was set for a historic convergence of strategies. Montgomery's careful, methodical approach collided with the American emphasis on speed and opportunism. The contrast could not have been more striking. Montgomery insisted on detailed briefings, multiple rehearsals, and incremental advances. The Americans, on the other hand, were ready to exploit any weaknesses as they appeared, willing to accept calculated risks to achieve rapid breakthroughs. This tension between doctrine's British meticulousness versus American mobility was emblematic of the broader challenge Eisenhower faced in managing the coalition. Each general believed in the superiority of his own methods, and each feared that the other's approach might jeopardize the operation. Then came March 22, 1945. Patton's Third Army, operating under American command, identified a vulnerable sector along the Rhine. Observing the enemy's overstretched defenses, Patton seized the moment. Without waiting for elaborate planning or extensive coordination with Montgomery's forces, he launched an opportunistic assault. Tanks, infantry, and artillery moved swiftly across the river, exploiting gaps in German lines and securing a bridgehead in record time. Communication lines buzzed with urgent updates as Patton relayed his progress directly to General Bradley. "We've crossed," he instructed. "Inform Eisenhower immediately. The Rhine is ours before Montgomery even begins." This audacious move exemplified the American philosophy that had carried them across France: speed, aggression, and decisive action. For Montgomery, it was infuriating. He had meticulously coordinated the British and Canadian elements for the official operation, yet here were the Americans achieving the same objective with far less preparation and far fewer casualties. The contrast could not have been more glaring, and Montgomery's ego suffered accordingly. He could not claim full credit for the Rhine crossing, yet he could not openly challenge Patton without provoking a crisis within the Allied command. Eisenhower, observing the situation, recognized the significance immediately. The Rhine had been crossed, a major strategic milestone achieved, and it had been accomplished under American initiative. Yet the operation still required coordination for sustained advances into Germany. Eisenhower's foresight in maintaining American control over Hodges and Simpson ensured that Patton's initiative could be integrated with Montgomery's larger operation without compromising overall objectives. The coalition held, and both British and American forces were able to advance simultaneously, demonstrating the effectiveness of a balanced command structure. However, the Rhine crossing also highlighted Montgomery's political maneuvering. Even in the midst of the operation, he continued to assert his influence over planning decisions, seeking to extend American subordination beyond the temporary arrangement. He argued that the success of the crossing depended on centralized command under his leadership, implying that American forces would falter without British guidance. Eisenhower, having anticipated such maneuvers, maintained strict limits. The 1st and 9th Armies were to cooperate for the Rhine crossing only, after which they would revert to American command. This careful boundary setting prevented Montgomery from consolidating power and preserved the integrity of the Allied operational structure. The Americans, for their part, had learned from previous encounters with Montgomery's overreach. Patton's aggressive exploitation of the Rhine crossing demonstrated the efficacy of their own doctrine. Speed and initiative, even in the face of potential risks, allowed them to achieve objectives that careful planning alone might have delayed. Simpson and Hodges coordinated their advances with Patton, ensuring that the temporary British command structure did not impede progress. This blend of cooperation and autonomy exemplified Eisenhower's genius in managing a coalition, allowing each commander to operate within their strengths while preventing any single personality from dominating the entire effort. The weeks following the Rhine crossing saw rapid advances into northern Germany. Patton's forces moved with remarkable agility, capturing key towns and disrupting German defensive lines. The Americans demonstrated that momentum, not meticulous planning, could achieve strategic objectives more quickly than Montgomery's slower, methodical approach. Meanwhile, Montgomery executed Operation Plunder as planned, successfully crossing the Rhine with British and Canadian forces. Yet the Americans had already secured critical positions, showcasing the effectiveness of initiative and decentralized command. This episode also reinforced the political dimension of coalition warfare. Eisenhower's intervention had not only preserved operational effectiveness, but had also prevented potential crises in Washington and London. Had Montgomery retained permanent control over American forces, he could have claimed credit for victories that were fundamentally American, undermining morale and creating friction within the alliance. By limiting his authority, Eisenhower maintained both military efficiency and political equilibrium, ensuring that the coalition could continue its final push into Germany without internal collapse. The Rhine crossing, therefore, became more than a tactical achievement. It was a validation of American doctrine and leadership. Patton's bold action demonstrated that speed, mobility, and opportunistic exploitation could achieve results that cautious planning alone could not. Eisenhower's careful balance of command authority ensured that these methods could be employed effectively, while Montgomery's temporary involvement highlighted both the strengths and limitations of meticulous British planning. The outcome reinforced the principle that in coalition warfare, strategic success depends not only on the enemy's weakness, but also on the ability to manage competing egos, doctrines, and national interests within the command structure. As the Allies pressed deeper into Germany, the Rhine crossing set the stage for the final operations of the war. Patton's Third Army, leveraging momentum and mobility, spearheaded advances that would eventually link with Soviet forces at the Elbe. Montgomery's contributions, while significant, were constrained by the limitations Eisenhower imposed. The temporary command of the American armies allowed for coordinated operations without granting any individual the opportunity to dominate the coalition. This balance of power preserved unity, demonstrated effective leadership, and underscored the critical role of Eisenhower in navigating both military and political challenges. In retrospect, the Rhine crossing illustrates a fundamental truth about coalition warfare. Victory is determined as much by the management of people, egos, and alliances as by tactical and operational brilliance. Eisenhower's decision to strip Montgomery of permanent command over American forces was not a minor administrative adjustment. It was a calculated strategic maneuver that preserved the cohesion, effectiveness, and morale of the Allied armies. Patton's audacious actions at the Rhine, executed under American authority, demonstrated the success of American doctrine and the wisdom of Eisenhower's intervention. The war would continue, but the lessons of March 1945 were clear. In coalition warfare, leadership, trust, and the ability to balance competing ambitions can be just as decisive as tanks, artillery, and infantry. Following the audacious crossing of the Rhine by Patton's Third Army, the dynamics of Allied command shifted dramatically. Montgomery, long accustomed to careful planning and hierarchical control, faced an unexpected reality. American forces under their own generals were demonstrating speed, initiative, and effectiveness that rivaled his meticulous preparations. His frustration was palpable. For months, he had envisioned himself orchestrating a grand, unified push into northern Germany, claiming both glory and strategic dominance. Yet, Eisenhower's intervention had curtailed his authority, ensuring that American armies remained under American command even during critical operations. The tension between Montgomery and the American generals, particularly Patton, Hodges, and Simpson, reflected deeper issues of doctrine and personality. Montgomery's approach emphasized layered defenses, overwhelming artillery, and slow, deliberate advances. American commanders, forged in the rapid campaigns across France and the Ardennes, relied on mobility, speed, and opportunistic exploitation. The Rhine crossing became a vivid illustration of these conflicting philosophies. While Montgomery meticulously prepared his forces for Operation Plunder, Patton and the Americans had already seized key sectors, forcing Montgomery to adapt to a rapidly changing battlefield. Eisenhower's strategy in managing the situation was as subtle as it was effective. He had anticipated Montgomery's desire to assert control, and had carefully limited his authority to specific operations. This temporary command structure allowed for coordination without granting Montgomery permanent control over American forces. By doing so, Eisenhower preserved the operational flexibility of the U.S. armies while avoiding public confrontation with the British general. In coalition warfare, such political and strategic foresight was as critical as battlefield success. The American forces, invigorated by the freedom to act decisively, pressed forward into northern Germany. Patton's rapid advances disrupted German defensive lines, capturing towns, bridges, and critical supply points. Meanwhile, Montgomery executed his planned operations, ensuring the British and Canadian forces maintained pressure from the north. The dual advance demonstrated the effectiveness of Eisenhower's balance. Each commander could leverage his strengths, yet neither could dominate the coalition or claim disproportionate credit. However, the Rhine crossing and its aftermath also exposed the fragility of alliances built on personality as much as strategy. Montgomery's ego and desire for recognition created ongoing friction. He attempted to extend his influence beyond the agreed-upon boundaries, subtly undermining American operational independence. Reports reached Eisenhower that Montgomery was hinting to British political leaders that American successes were contingent on British guidance. Such maneuvers, though not overtly insubordinate, threatened coalition cohesion and risked eroding trust among commanders. Eisenhower responded with measured authority. He reinforced the temporary nature of Montgomery's command, emphasizing that American armies would revert to their own generals following specific operations. This clarity was essential not only for operational planning, but for morale. American soldiers, having suffered enormous losses in the Ardennes and previous campaigns, needed to know that their efforts would be directed by commanders accountable to their own chain of command. Patton, Hodges, and Simpson could focus on exploiting German weaknesses without political interference. As the Allies advanced, the operational and strategic lessons of the Rhine crossing became increasingly evident. Speed and initiative proved decisive. Patton's opportunistic attack achieved objectives that meticulous planning might have delayed. Yet the operation also underscored the importance of coalition management. Eisenhower's ability to mediate between egos, doctrines, and national interests ensured that tactical success translated into strategic advantage. The crossing was more than a river assault. It was a demonstration of American operational philosophy validated against the structured, methodical approach of Montgomery. The political dimension of Eisenhower's decision cannot be overstated. By limiting Montgomery's authority, he prevented the British general from claiming undue credit for American victories. This maintained morale within U.S. forces and reinforced trust in American leadership. At the same time, it preserved the broader coalition, avoiding a rupture that could have delayed or derailed the final push into Germany. Eisenhower's balancing act required both firmness and diplomacy, demonstrating that leadership in coalition warfare is as much about managing relationships as it is about directing troops. In the weeks that followed, the Allies continued their advance into northern Germany. Patton's Third Army, exploiting momentum and mobility, captured key cities and logistical hubs, paving the way for the eventual link-up with Soviet forces at the Elbe. Montgomery's forces maintained pressure from the north, securing territory and fortifying positions. The temporary command arrangement worked. Both British and American forces achieved their objectives, and coalition unity remained intact despite underlying tensions. Yet the Rhine crossing also left a lasting imprint on military doctrine and coalition strategy. Eisenhower's decision validated American emphasis on initiative, speed, and decentralized command. Montgomery's meticulous planning, while effective, proved less adaptable in dynamic combat situations. The episode reinforced the principle that in coalition warfare, operational success depends not only on military skill, but on the careful management of personalities, doctrines, and political considerations. For Montgomery, the experience was a humbling lesson. His inability to dominate American forces, combined with Patton's audacious success, highlighted the limitations of ego-driven command. For Eisenhower, it was a vindication of strategic foresight, demonstrating that decisive leadership often requires balancing competence, ambition, and politics simultaneously. For the Americans, it was a reaffirmation of their doctrine. Mobility, initiative, and rapid exploitation could achieve results even in the face of entrenched opposition and established hierarchies. As northern Germany fell, the consequences of these decisions became clear. The American forces, under their own generals, were positioned to capture key industrial regions, link with Allied forces, and shape the post-war order. Montgomery's contributions, while significant, were constrained by Eisenhower's limits. The coalition remained intact, but the episode underscored the enduring tension between national pride, personal ambition, and operational necessity. The Rhine crossing had not only opened a path into Germany, it had revealed the true complexities of Allied command, the perils of unchecked ambition, and the critical importance of leadership that could balance competing interests. By the end of March 1945, the Allied advance was unstoppable. Patton's Third Army, along with Hodges's and Simpson's American forces, pressed relentlessly into northern Germany. Montgomery's British and Canadian troops maintained their northern front, ensuring that the Germans could not regroup. The Rhine crossing had been decisive not only militarily but politically. Eisenhower's carefully calibrated control had preserved the coalition, empowered American initiative, and checked the ambitions of a general whose ego might otherwise have fractured the alliance. In summary, the aftermath of the Rhine crossing demonstrated the intersection of strategy, doctrine, and leadership. Eisenhower's intervention preserved the operational integrity of the Allied armies while ensuring political stability. Patton's bold exploitation of opportunity validated American methods. Montgomery, constrained yet still influential, illustrated both the strengths and pitfalls of meticulous planning. The episode underscored a timeless lesson in coalition warfare. Victory is shaped as much by leadership, trust, and the management of human dynamics as by artillery, tanks, and infantry. By April 1945, the Allied armies were racing across Germany, the result of months of strategic planning, decisive action, and the careful management of personalities within the coalition. Patton's Third Army had advanced rapidly, exploiting every weakness in German defenses. The Rhine had been crossed, key cities captured, and supply lines secured. The Americans were operating with remarkable freedom under their own generals, while Montgomery's British and Canadian forces pressed forward from the north in a more deliberate, methodical advance. The balance Eisenhower had established months earlier was paying dividends. The American and British commanders now faced the final stages of the war in Europe. For Patton, the opportunity to push deeper into Germany without political interference or operational constraint was a vindication of his philosophy of mobile, aggressive warfare. The Rhine crossing, executed weeks earlier by both Patton and Montgomery under different conditions, had highlighted the contrast between rapid exploitation and methodical planning. Patton's ability to seize the initiative repeatedly forced German forces into reactive positions, accelerating the collapse of resistance and hastening the end of the conflict. Montgomery, despite his meticulous planning and careful preparation for Operation Plunder, realized that his ambitions had been curtailed. Eisenhower's decision to return the First Army to American command and limit Montgomery's control over the Ninth Army after the Rhine crossing underscored a simple truth. Coalition warfare demanded compromise. National pride, operational freedom, and personality clashes could not dictate strategy. Montgomery's desire for glory had been tempered by the realities of Allied command, proving that even a brilliant strategist could be restrained when political and military priorities intersected. The American armies, particularly the 9th and 1st, now moved with remarkable cohesion and speed. Under Generals Hodges, Simpson, and Patton, they captured critical industrial areas, liberated towns and cities, and secured contact with Soviet forces along the Elbe. The strategic consequences were profound. By keeping American forces under American command, Eisenhower ensured that operational priorities aligned with the capabilities and doctrines of the U.S. Army. This decision prevented unnecessary delays, avoided friction with British and Canadian units, and preserve the morale and trust of American soldiers who had already endured immense losses. Patton's rapid advance also sent a clear message about the effectiveness of American doctrine. While Montgomery's methodical approach relied on careful logistics and overwhelming force, the American strategy emphasized mobility, flexibility, and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses. This approach allowed Patton's forces to reach objectives faster, minimizing exposure to entrenched German defenses and capturing critical positions before the enemy could respond. The contrast between the two approaches was stark and became a defining lesson in coalition command and operational planning. The final weeks of the war in Europe were shaped by these decisions. Montgomery's forces, operating within their northern sector, made steady progress, securing key areas and supporting the overall campaign. Meanwhile, the American armies, free to operate according to their doctrine, penetrated deeper into Germany, capturing cities, disarming remaining resistance, and ultimately linking with Soviet forces at the Elbe. Eisenhower's careful orchestration of command assignments ensured that both the British and American efforts contributed to victory without causing conflict or undermining the alliance. For Montgomery, the lesson was enduring. His ego and desire for recognition had been constrained, demonstrating that even the most accomplished commanders could not operate unchecked within a coalition. Eisenhower's foresight had preserved the strategic unity of the Allies while allowing American forces to achieve maximum operational effectiveness. Montgomery's British and Canadian troops remained effective, but their progress had been deliberately limited to preserve balance and prevent political complications. For Patton, the outcome was a confirmation of his philosophy. Mobility, initiative, and aggressive exploitation of opportunities could yield decisive results, even in the face of potential interference from other Allied commanders. The Rhine crossing, combined with the subsequent American advances, demonstrated that operational independence, when coupled with effective leadership and coordination, could shape the course of a campaign and accelerate victory. Eisenhower's decision to limit Montgomery's control also carried political implications. By maintaining the integrity of American command, he reassured U.S. political leadership that their forces were operating effectively and that American soldiers' sacrifices were directed by competent generals accountable to their nation. Simultaneously, he avoided creating a public rift between the British and American commands, preserving the credibility and cohesion of the Allied coalition. His delicate balance of personalities, egos, and national interests proved as critical to victory as any tank, artillery, or infantry maneuver. By the time the Allies closed in on Berlin, the results of these decisions were unmistakable. Patton's rapid movements had disrupted German defensive lines, captured strategic objectives, and ensured that American forces played a leading role in the final operations. Montgomery, while successful in his northern sector, had been constrained by the limits imposed after the Rhine crossing. Eisenhower's careful management of command ensured that the coalition's final push into Germany remained coordinated, effective, and politically sustainable. In retrospect, the decision to strip Montgomery of temporary command over American forces was not an act of favoritism or personal spite. It was a strategic choice designed to maximize operational effectiveness, preserve coalition unity, and prevent the ambitions of a single commander from overshadowing collective goals. The American generals, free to act decisively, proved the value of initiative and mobility. Montgomery, constrained but still contributing, illustrated the challenges of coalition leadership where national pride and personal ambition intersect. Ultimately, the final weeks of the war in Europe validated Eisenhower's judgment. The American armies, operating under their own generals, achieved rapid, decisive victories, capturing key regions, linking with Soviet forces, and ensuring the collapse of German resistance. Montgomery's British and Canadian forces supported the effort, maintaining pressure from the north. Patton's Third Army exemplified the effectiveness of operational freedom, and the coalition remained intact despite underlying tensions. The lessons of this period resonate beyond World War II. Coalition warfare demands more than strategy and logistics. It requires careful management of personalities, national interests, and egos. Victory depends not only on the capabilities of armies, but on the wisdom of those who command them. Eisenhower's decision to limit Montgomery's authority, maintain American operational independence, and balance competing interests ensured that the Allied armies could achieve their objectives swiftly and decisively. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was effectively won. The Rhine had been crossed, Germany was collapsing, and American, British, and Canadian forces were advancing in coordinated complementary campaigns. Patton's speed and initiative had demonstrated the power of American doctrine. Montgomery's meticulous approach had reinforced the value of careful planning. Eisenhower's leadership had ensured that the coalition remained functional, cohesive, and politically stable. The temporary removal of nearly 300,000 American soldiers from Montgomery's command had not only preserved the operational advantage, but had shaped the final outcome of the war, proving that decisive leadership and the management of human dynamics are as crucial to victory as tanks, artillery, or infantry.